Every motherfucker here knows what we need to do.
The Saints are the real deal.
What a pleasant fucking surprise.
There's something to be said about the classics.
The real deal is that once you're in, you can't get out.
You seem like an enterprising guy. I'm sure you can come up with something.
Anyone but them.
I'm the best racer that ever came out of Chinatown.
I'm a little nervous about going into the city by myself because, well, I'm not poor.
You're going to die here, son.
So what do we do now?
We wait.
The fuck you mean we wait?
Wait, 'cause I fucking said so.
What's happening?
That was a hell of an explosion.
There will be 3 different types of people who will watch this. The first type are those who have never played a Saints Row game in their lives. In which case, I welcome you, as there's no better game to start with than the first in the series. The second type, and by far the most common I imagine, are those who have played some of the later Saints Row games, such as Saints Row 2, 3 or 4, but never had a chance to get into the first. In which case, I understand and welcome you too, as it's about time you did. The last type are those who have played Saints Row 1 and are just watching this purely because they are an absolute baller. In which case, respect. But regardless of who you are or why you're watching this, there is one reason and one reason only why I'm making this. And that is that Saints Row 1, without any shadow of a doubt, is one of the most underrated and underappreciated games of all time. In fact, it absolutely baffles me just how little this game is discussed, especially considering just how much of a groundbreaking experience it was upon its release. But therein lies the question: why? Why is this game so underrated? Well, I believe there's 2 main reasons, and before we get into the game itself, how about we have a little bit of a history lesson? In 2004, Rockstar Games released Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Players fell in love with its gangster setting and the charming, if not flawed, characters that laid within it, leading to it becoming one of the most universally acclaimed games ever made. However, the next addition to the Grand Theft Auto saga, GTA 4, would not be released until 4 years later in 2008. Now, by today's standards, 4 years is bugger all to wait for a game. Today, games simply take much longer to develop, so waiting 4 years isn't so much a surprise anymore, but an expectancy. But back in the 2000s, it was a much smoother and simpler time, and those 4 years between GTA San Andreas and GTA 4 felt like decades. If only there was a game of a similar vein that just so happened to release in the middle of this oh-so-long wait. Enter Saints Row. Saints Row, developed by Volition, seemed to be everything that fans of GTA San Andreas would ever want. A true next-gen experience, fueled by the, at the time, huge power of the recently released Xbox 360. Despite this, however, upon its release, Saints Row was, to put it bluntly, unjustly ignored by many, even those who, had they have played it, would have actually liked it. And the reason for this is because of what I like to call the GTA clone myth. At the time, Saints Row was panned by reviewers for being a so-called unoriginal game. Taking a look back at this ancient IGN review from back in the day, which by the way has more dislikes than likes, essentially says it all.
This is an open design, 3D, third-person perspective action game, and it plays, looks, and feels just like GTA. So on the con side, the game's terribly unoriginal, and it copies GTA to such an extent that some people won't get over it. I actually did because the game's fun.
Because Saints Row was constantly and continually compared to GTA, it was dismissed by many as merely being a cheap copy. Kind of like a supermarket off-brand cereal, a poor imitation of the real deal, and thus was ignored by many. The mere fact that this is a production about Saints Row, and I instead find myself giving you a history lesson on Grand Theft Auto, should only go to show just how intrinsically linked this franchise has unjustly become to that which came before it. The truth is that Saints Row was not by any means a GTA clone. Saints Row was certainly inspired by GTA, but inspiration is not the same as imitation, and that's something that reviewers of the time just couldn't seem to understand. This isn't the first time in gaming history that such a phenomenon has occurred. Back when Doom, the genesis of the first-person shooter genre, was released, other FPSs that came out after it were often dismissed as being mere Doom clones. Thankfully, as time passed and the FPS genre became so well established, this label has since been foreclosed. But sadly the same could not be said for this type of open-world crime simulator, leading to any game within said genre still being dismissed as a GTA clone. But that's not the only problem, as the other reason this game is so underrated is actually quite simple. It's a pain in the ass to actually go and play it. As a game developer, you want to sell as many copies of your game as possible. For the last 2 decades, there has been 4 main solid platforms in the gaming industry: PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, and of course, the Ouya. I'm joking, PC. Naturally, the more platforms your game is available on, the wider of an audience it can reach. Saints Row 2, 3 and 4 understood this quite well, with all of these games being available on multiple platforms. Sadly, however, Saints Row 1, unbelievably, is still only available exclusively on the Xbox. That's right, this game didn't even receive a PC port of any kind whatsoever. As a result, the overwhelming majority of people, even hardcore Saints Row fans, are essentially locked out of playing the game unless they get an Xbox. And let's face it, no one's actually mad enough to buy an Xbox just to be able to play a game from 2006, right? So yeah, as a result of being unjustly branded as a GTA clone and unfathomably remaining as an Xbox exclusive, Saints Row 1 has unfortunately gone under many people's radars. But no more! No more, I say! It's time for me to show you this game so you can see what the big fuss is all about. Ah, good times. I tell you, there's very little that puts a smile on my face, but that old 360 chime does it almost every time. Alright, so first things first, as soon as you start a new game, you immediately get prompted to create your character. That's right, in Saints Row, you don't play as a predetermined character, you play as yourself. Pfft, what a GTA clone. In all seriousness, however, though advanced character creators are quite commonplace today, back in 2006, this was simply unprecedented. I mean seriously, you can change almost everything about your character's features. Your hair colour, hair length, eye colour, facial features, muscle, fat, heck, even your bloody earlobes. It really is quite interesting the sorts of characters you can make with this. Now, when given the option, I of course like to play myself in games, you know, immersion and all that. So, I tried to make myself, and yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you... me! Do I look like that? Yeah, truth be told, the character creator is actually quite limited in many ways. Unfortunately, if you have long hair like me, unless you want to look like you have a dead animal on your head, you're basically out of luck. In addition, for some reason, every single facial hair option makes you look like some sort of rapist. It's so strange. Why is it you can change your character's earlobes with such extreme precision, but can't have some proper long hair without looking like you sniff seats when no one's looking? Another odd limitation of the character creator is that you can't play as a lady. Now, considering probably 95% of Saints Row players are likely to be men, I don't think this is that much of a big deal. However, for the few ladies who would actually check out this game, it would have been nice if the option was there for them. On the contrary, however, it does at least prevent Redditors from creating their quote-unquote dream waifus, so at least there's that. Creating your character is never a done deal, as there are numerous barbers and plastic surgeons out there who you can pay to change your character's appearance again, so no pressure here. In the end, rather than playing a bastardized version of myself, I instead decided to create the ugliest character that I possibly could. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you... Blobby! Now that's more like it. Alright, so after making your character, the game properly starts. You're just walking down the street minding your own business when all of a sudden, a huge gang fight sparks up. You found yourself in the
Wrong time, wrong place, dawg.
And was about to be executed in cold blood. Fortunately, however, you were saved by two guys, Julius and Troy, who hail from a gang known as the 3rd Street Saints. They tell you that the city is going to hell due to gang violence, and the Saints have been made to help clean up the streets and make them safe again once and for all. They offer you to come over to their headquarters at the old abandoned church, whereby you can help them do so if you so please. And thus, with that, Saints Row 1 officially begins.
It's our time now. Let's get this shit started.
And that fundamentally is what Saints Row 1 is all about. Gangs, gangs, and more gangs. You must work with your fellow 3rd Street Saints to take over territory from their three rival gangs, with the ultimate goal of taking over all of the city. But just who are these three rival gangs? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's start off with my favourite of the three, the Vice Kings. Represented by the colour of yellow, the Vice Kings are by far the most powerful and feared gang in the city. Starting off as a typical street gang, the VKs eventually expanded into becoming a huge corporate empire. Having their own record label alongside numerous links to state agents, the VKs are all about using the corruption of the state to their utmost advantage. Their leader, Benjamin King, is renowned as a man not to be messed with. Not that that phases the infamous Johnny Frosted Tips Gat, who shall serve with you as the Saints' lieutenant in taking down the VKs once and for all. Secondly, we have the Los Canales.
It's not the Los Carnales.
Shut up, Dex. Represented by the colour of red, Los Canales are the oldest gang in the city. Known for their unrivaled drug trading capabilities, this multi-generational menace has been terrorising people for far too long. Led by two brothers, this ruthless combo will stop at nothing to put an end to anyone who gets in their way. Alongside Dex and Troy, you must put a stop to them. And lastly, we have the West Side Rollers, with a Z. Yeah, that's how you know they're cool. Represented by the colour of blue, the Rollers are the wealthiest gang in the city. Being obsessed with cars, they can often be seen racing around or modifying them to do so. Led by the mysterious Mr. Price, it is unclear who or why the Rollers have so much funding, and what their true aims are. Paired with the no-nonsense undercover Lynn, you must help her sabotage and ultimately destroy the Rollers from within. Each one of these gangs are culturally, economically, and symbolically different from each other, and how you deal with them will represent those differences accordingly in the form of missions. One of the cool things about Saints Row is just how non-linear its mission structure actually is. You can deal with the gangs in any order you would like, one at a time, two at a time, or heck, even all three at the same time, if you're an absolute lunatic. The missions themselves are extremely well varied. One time you might be raiding a strip club, another time you might be raiding a building to save someone, another time you may be chasing someone down the highway at 90 miles per hour. You never know what to expect, and the missions will always keep you guessing where the story is going to go next. I have to say, however, the missions really aren't that much of a challenge in of themselves. The game has no difficulty options of any kind, making those with an advanced skill set breeze through them with relative ease. I found myself completing the missions pretty much every time on my first attempt, except this one mission whereby you were avoiding being blown up while driving around an airport at 100 miles per hour. Yeah, that one is awful. I have to say, however, the lack of difficulty is probably a blessing in disguise, as there are no proper checkpoints in the game at all. So, if you actually do fail a mission, you're starting right back at the start. Oh, the amount of times I drove back to that bloody airport. Almost every time you complete a mission, you will take over a piece of your enemy's territory and annex it into the Saints. At the start of the game, the city map is all split up under the control of different gangs. However, with every mission you complete, it will only get more and more purple. Whatever gang controls the territory will determine what NPCs will spawn in that territory. So if the Saints run the place, then Saints will spawn there, and you can recruit them as your homies who will follow you around and help you how they can. But if you lurk around in an enemy territory, well, it'll be quite dangerous, as rival gang members will be lurking there instead. On top of that, even when you take over an enemy gang's territory, they may try to take it back, leading you to have to go back there and teach them a lesson once and for all. Alright, so, complete missions, take over territory. Sounds simple enough, but it ain't that easy. You see, in order to be eligible to do a mission, you're going to need to get yourself some respect. If you don't have any respect and still try to do a mission, you will be rejected, as they don't believe you are worthy enough to accomplish it. Question is then, how'd you get respect? Well, before we get into that, we're going to have to get in the right clothes. Littered around the city, you will find clothes shops, whereby you can customize how your character dresses. You can buy shirts, hoodies, pants, etc., and colour them how you want. However, if you decide to represent for the Saints by wearing purple, all respect you earn will be amplified. So essentially, you can dress however you want, but the game does reward immersion and loyalty, which is pretty cool. You know, I like to think that I dress quite respectfully. What do you think, folks? What do you... Well, you know what, I suppose you're right. I mean, what am I thinking? I'm doing a retrospective on Saints Row. I'm not even wearing purple. Hey, hang on a second. Let me come back when I'm dressed a little bit more respectfully. Respect. Pimp Daddy Purple. Men's costume. Oh my god. Adult plus size? Oh no! It's quite spacious. I'm gonna be honest with you, I bought this for a joke, but it's hella comfy, I won't lie. Damn. Oh, forgot my hat. Hang on. There we go. It's less like a pimp hat and more like a sombrero, honestly. I mean, how big's your head? Jesus Christ. Anyway. Respect. Homie. You know, clothing in this game is actually quite hilarious, as there's numerous different stores that each have differing quality of clothes. For example, Sloppy Seconds, as its name may imply, sells really affordable but horrendously ugly clothes that won't amplify your respect much for wearing them. In fact, if you go around with clothes from here, NPCs out in the world will actually insult you for doing so.
I'd go home and change if I were you.
Upper Peg is my personal favourite store of On The Rag, which sells mostly hippie clothes. Slightly more expensive, slightly more respect, but still pretty bad. A step up is Branded, which sells quite normal clothing, again providing a higher level of respect for a higher price. And lastly, the big cheese is First Impressions, which has the most expensive but also most respectful clothes. At the end of the day, it's up to a combination of your bank account and personal taste what you can get. Oh yeah, and there's jewellery shops that do kind of the same thing, but come on, unless you're rocking that golden $sign medallion, what the hell are you doing? Now that we're repping our colours, it's time to actually earn some respect. Question is, how? The main way to earn respect is through what's called activities, which are kind of like these little mini-games. You know in most games how the main story missions are like, what, 80-90% of the game? and the other 10% is all the other little bonus stuff? Well, in Saints Row, that couldn't be further from the truth. The main story missions only account for like half the actual playtime, whereas the bonus stuff like the activities take up the other half. That's not an over-exaggeration, by the way. There are 10 activities in total, and I'm going to go through them starting from my most favourite down to my least. Alright, so first off, we have drug trafficking. This is my favourite. I don't know why, I just really enjoyed it for some reason. Essentially, the way it works is, you get put in the passenger seat of a drug dealer's car, and you have to protect them from the police and other rival gangs as they do their deals. Kind of like the wanted level star system in GTA, Saints Row has a similar system called notoriety, whereby you can get up to 5 levels of notoriety from both the police and other rival gangs, sometimes even at the same time. The higher your notoriety, the more they will try to come after you. So for example, with the police, a 1-star wanted level will result in maybe 1 or 2 standard police cars stalking you, but a 5-star wanted level will result in SWAT vans, helicopters, FBI. I mean, it's just insane. This activity, like most of them, has 8 levels that get progressively more difficult the higher you go. And it's very amusing to me to do some of the later levels where it's just me and some dude in a hippie van trying to do some deals, while half the US Army is on our tail. Now, I imagine that most people probably wouldn't pick this as their favourite, but, you know, there's just something relaxing about being driven around by an NPC. You know, it's kind of like a form of ASMR, if you know what I mean. No, you probably don't know what I mean. Alright, next up we have Mayhem. The goal of Mayhem, as its name implies, is to cause as much havoc as possible. Blow up cars, assassinate civilians, whatever you can do to cause damage to the city at large, you do it. Now, there's a time limit, mind you, and that's the difficult part, causing so much damage in such a short amount of time. You do get bonuses depending on what kind of weapons you use, what kind of cars you destroy, etc, etc. And you'll want to pay attention to these bonuses, else you're in for a rough time. Mayhem is kind of like letting out your inner caveman. Allow your primal desire for destruction to take over and go wild. A lot of fun. Alright, next, insurance fraud. Insurance fraud is kind of like Mayhem, except this time, rather than doing damage to everyone else, instead, you're doing damage to yourself. While doing insurance fraud, you enter a sort of ragdoll mode, whereby you become immune to most car collision damage and thus can dive in front of vehicles. The aim is to get hit extremely hard by oncoming vehicles so that you can take out a huge insurance claim. Basically, the greater the dive, the harder you get hit, and thus the more cash you get. Again, like Mayhem, there is a time limit, and that's what makes this so difficult. You really have to practice your diving in front of car capabilities and quickly be able to identify what cars will do the most damage. Explaining this out loud makes me sound like I'm off my rocker, but I swear this is real. Alright, now let's get into some more middle-of-the-road activities. Middle-of-the-road activities like escort. Prepare yourself. Alright, so here you have to drive around a limo with a, lady of the night, shall we say. And we have to go around and pick up her customers, friends. When her and her friends are both in the back of the limo and they start wrestling, the press will turn up and stalk them by trying to take photos. As the driver, you have to avoid the press as much as possible and allow them to complete their WWE fun times in peace. And yeah, it really is as weird as it sounds. You know, the worst part about escort is the noises they make when they're in the back of that limo. While doing this, I honestly had to turn down the voice volume so that no one thought I was doing, you know what. I'm not joking with you, and if you live with anyone else, I recommend you do the same. Overall, pretty fun, if not very awkward. Next up, Snatch. I'm dressed for the occasion. Snatch is the first activity you get introduced to, and it's pretty easy to see why, as it's a simple one to understand. Essentially, you have to go around and rescue ladies from their abusive pimps by killing the pimps and then driving the ladies away to safety. The difficult part here isn't so much that, but again, the time limit. If they're all just out walking around on street corners, then it's a piece of cake. But if, like in many of the later levels, they're driving around in a car, man, those car chases can seriously take some time. this activity also comes with the best rewards. The Pimp Cane is a shotgun that does a ton of damage. And you know my beautiful set of clothes right here? Yeah, that's from this too. Highly recommend just for the rewards alone. Let's talk about hijacking. Truth be told, this one is honestly quite a boring concept. You literally just get told there's a car you need to steal, so you go and take it, drive it back, and yeah. I mean, that really is it. There's no flash, no humour, it's just a straight up car robbery. Not really much to say about this one, honestly. It just feels like a time sink. An activity for the sake of having an activity. And that's all there is to it. At least it's not frustrating, I guess. Demolition Derby, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. This is an activity that has a really interesting concept, but is really bloody frustrating. So basically, you get put into an arena where you drive around in an absolute scrap of a car alongside a bunch of others. The aim is to ram your car into the others and destroy theirs before they destroy yours. And you had to have been responsible in destroying a certain number of cars before the time runs out. What makes this so frustrating is that it is almost impossible to truly predict exactly where the other cars are actually gonna go. It just feels like you're peeing in the wind and hoping it doesn't blow in your direction. Fortunately, each attempt is pretty much always around like 2 minutes, so as long as you stick with it, you should be fine. Up next is racing, and yeah, it's pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. You go around racing other cars. Simple as that, really. Honestly, I kind of feel bad for putting racing this far down. It's not that it's a bad activity by any means, it's more so just that I'm not a racing games kind of guy. In fact, truth be told, for what is essentially just a mini game, this is a pretty damn good racing sim. You can race in whatever car you want, so when I started this activity, I thought I'd outsmart the system by going and buying a really fast sports car so that I could, presumably, win with ease. Little did I realise that actually the other cars scale with yours, so if you ride a really fast car, so will everyone else. So, the trick is, you want a car that's not got a very high speed, but has great handling. To anyone who does this, my recommendation is the FBI vehicle, because the game thinks that it's a slow car because it's so big, but it isn't by any means. It's fast, but more importantly, its handling is seemingly unrivaled. You can turn around corners with such ease that it feels like a breeze. Highly recommend. Alright, and let's finish up with the last two activities that I think are absolutely bloody awful. I am of course talking about Hitman. Oh. With Hitman, you get a list of people who you have to assassinate, alongside a rough estimation of where they will be, as well as the weapon you must use in order to kill them with. Some will require you to use a melee weapon, others a pistol, SMG, shotgun, rifle, projectile thrown weapon, you get the idea. The problem with this, however, is that it is completely and utterly based on RNG. You could find a target in mere minutes, or alternatively, you could be driving around for hours trying to find that one guy who just won't spawn. It is an absolute pain in the ass, and whoever designed this disaster should have been fired. The worst part about this activity is that it just outright lies to you. Most of the time, I found the targets in a completely different place than where they said I would. Oh, it's just so frustrating. Even thinking about it gives me a headache. And Chop Shop, the last activity, is the exact same thing, just for cars. And in fact, it's even more frustrating, as sometimes, even when you find the car they want, it's still not good enough, and you need to go out and modify it. Oh, it's just so unbelievably boring and frustrating. I think I'd rather play the Saints Row reboot than do these again. Alright, let's not go that far. You know, I've just realised that throughout this, I've not spoke about the actual setting of the game. I keep calling it the city, but what city? This, my friends, is Stillwater. Stillwater is without any shadow of a doubt one of the greatest open world maps ever made, and I'm not just saying that, I really mean it. Yes, of course, it's very dated and a bit small by today's standards, but that doesn't take away from its merits. You know, it's amazing. Before just now, I last played Saints Row 1 probably like 10 years ago, and despite that, I still remember this map like the back of my hand. And the reason for that, I think, is just how unbelievably defined the map is. One of my biggest problems with games like GTA 3 and GTA 4 was just how dull and repetitive the world felt. Everywhere you went looked almost identical. The same cannot be said for Stillwater. You see, we all know how Vice City is based on Miami and Los Santos is based on Los Angeles, but Stillwater isn't based on any one specific place. No, instead, it's a microscopic representation of America as a whole. As such, every single part of this city looks and feels completely different, and to prove the point, I'd like to give you a little tour, if you don't mind. Starting in the east, we of course have Saints Row, an extremely rough, run down and... it's a mess basically. Saints Row, with its terrible housing and abandoned buildings, is clearly a poor and very deprived area. Now you guys might not believe this, but in real life I actually live in an area that makes even Saints Row look pretty. The reason I mention that is because, whereas I think most people would look at Saints Row and just see a dump, to me, Saints Row seems to represent the typical post-globalized working class area, whereby so many people languishing in poverty have found themselves turning to crime and gangs out of desperation due to a clear lack of opportunity, which is something that I see commonly in reality. This belief is only supported the further south we go as we start to enter the so-called factories district. Here, huge swaths of land lay dormant, and, as its name implies, there are certainly factories, but there ain't anyone doing any work on them. They're seemingly almost all abandoned. It's clear to me that Southeast Stillwater is a representation of, as I said earlier, the betrayal of Western elites abandoning the poor of their nations, and as such, before us lays the consequences of such economic and cultural downturns on full display. Is it any wonder then that the Los Canales, a gang that profiteers from selling drugs, prospers in an area whereby so many of its residents are looking for a cheap and easy escape? I think not. Meanwhile, the north of Stillwater, known as downtown, couldn't be any more different. There's skyscrapers, luxurious buildings, and wealth galore. A stark contrast from the derelict south, to say the least. To me, downtown is a representation of how wealth, power and fame all tend to consolidate in one area, should there be no barriers to disallow it, as proven by the Vice Kings slotting right in here via corruption. And to the west lies the suburbs, which is inarguably the most beautiful part of the city. Filled with high-quality housing with great gardens and beautiful clean streets, the suburbs are where Stillwater's most wealthy live in relative peace and prosperity, shielded far away from the horrors that those less fortunate have to deal with. It isn't a surprise to me that the Rollers, who are by far the most aimless and frankly pointless gang, live here, as they represent the sorts of people who live in these areas quite well. Posers, often without purpose. Well, either that or I'm just projecting my internalised class frustrations unnecessarily in a retrospective of a video game from 2006, but whatever. And man, we're not even done yet. There's also Chinatown, the docks, the airport, just so many cool interiors. You can go to the cinema and replay missions, go and get some fast food to restore your health. I mean, my word, Stillwater, it just hits different, man. But hey, speaking of airports, something very strange about Saints Row 1 is that, well, there's no helicopters or planes of any kind. It's weird. If you get a high enough wanted level, helicopters will show up, but you can't actually use them. Same with bikes and boats, there just are none. The vehicle selection in the game is actually very limited. And granted, it's not something you're going to think about while playing, it's just one of those things that after the fact you realise and just think, odd. But hey, at least there's a ton of cool cars and trucks to pick from, like my personal favourite of the status quo. Oh yeah. Now, it wouldn't be an open world crime sim if there wasn't some banging tunes while you were cruising around. But I don't know if you guys know this, but licensing tracks, especially from large artists, costs a pretty penny, to say the least. And Volition ain't no rock star. It's my belief that because of this, they simply couldn't afford to license a lot of mainstream tunes that one would probably expect. The downside of this is obvious. A lot of the tracks in this game you probably haven't heard before. However, the upside is also obvious, being that a lot of the tracks in this game you probably haven't heard before. I didn't notice until making this just how many relatively unknown or underground artists that the game features. As a result of this, Saints Row 1 introduced me to so many fantastic tunes that I wouldn't have heard otherwise. Blue Skies, Flavour of the Month, and Grindin' being some of my personal favourites. The game has a ton of radio stations, and over the last few days I've pretty much listened to all they have to offer. Alright, time for the tier list. From best to worst. K-Rhyme and SZUP are tied at S tier. Both of these are rap stations, and hey, if rap's not your thing, then I urge you to at least give these a shot, as there's some absolute bangers on there. A tier would be a tie between The Chronic, another rap station, yeah, I don't know why there's 3, and Classic, which plays some amazing classical tunes. Yes, my favourite genres are rap and classical. Really. B tier, 420. Yeah, I think you can guess what that is. Some reggae. Not the greatest reggae I've ever heard, it has to be said, but, you know. C tier, Gen X, The Rock, and The Crunch. I just don't like these stations. I don't mind rock and metal, but these just ain't good. D tier, K12. Yeah, electronica just sounds like robots screwing each other to me. Not my style at all. And also, easy. I don't know what the hell kind of music this is meant to be, but it just sounds like a circus to me. E tier, The Faction. I don't even know what this station is even trying to be. Every time it comes on, I find myself turning it off as fast as possible before it gives me a headache. Ugh, no thank you. And F tier, WMD Kaboom. Now this station is actually just talk radio, so there are no tunes at all. The reason it's so far down is because it's essentially a satirical interpretation of American conservative talk show hosts from the mid-2000s. Now I think it's fine to make fun of people's political beliefs, but if you're going to talk smack and over-exaggerate one side, you should at least do it to the other side as well, especially considering that today, a lot of the talking points that American conservatives made in the mid-2000s have proven to be correct. To put it bluntly, this just hasn't aged well. Overall, however, some pretty solid stations. But there's something about this game's tunes that I just don't get. Around the city, you'll find these CD stores, which really should show just how ancient this game actually is, and in there you can buy CDs of your favourite tunes. After you've done that, you can make a custom playlist out of them on your MP3 player. And yes, I really did just say MP3 player. Not sure how you can play a CD on an MP3 player, but anyway, here's what I don't understand. Radio stations only play like 7 tracks each or something like that, which makes them very repetitive after a few hours of play. Seriously, the amount of times I've heard "bounce like my checks did back in the day" is unbelievable. However, when it comes to CDs, there's a ton of them. Essentially, I don't understand why they bothered putting all these tunes in the game, but then locked them away behind an optional feature, rather than just playing them on the radio. Very odd decision, I have to say, so make sure you don't skimp on these CD stores, folks. And hey, speaking of tunes, in my last production I had a little contest with my comment section to see if anyone could identify the soundtracks I used in it. There were some pretty good guesses, but I'd like to congratulate AR1 Nova for being the first person to guess correctly. So AR1 Nova, you're probably wondering what your prize is for doing so. Huh? I present to you a House Hexagon Certificate of Fun Times. Oh yeah, you can go and print that out, stick it on your wall, or, I don't know, show your friends and family. I'm sure they'll be very proud of you. For those of you who missed out, however, don't worry, you'll be pleased to know that you too have a chance to win a House Hexagon Certificate of Fun Times. Hidden somewhere in this Saints Row production is a Shih Tzu. The first person who manages to comment the timestamp of where it is will get a certificate. But spoiler alert, you won't be able to. But hey folks, the MP3 player ain't the only thing that's ancient. Take a look at this phone. Oh, that brings me back. Yeah folks, you see, as Saints Row 1 came out in 2006, that means it's actually 1 year younger than even the first iPhone, as that came out back in 2007. This phone right here is actually one of the last remnants of the pre-smartphone era. You know, back when phones were actually just used to make calls rather than waste your time. I don't know if it's just me, but man, it's fascinating to see this today, as I remember having one of these old Nokia phones that looked just like this. The phone isn't just there for show, however. You can actually use it to make calls. Hidden around the world are numerous different phone numbers you can find and call up to get some sort of bonus. For example, on taxis you can find their number, and if you call them up, you can actually take a taxi, which serves as a form of fast travel. Pretty cool. In other cases, you can come across situations whereby you can find a phone number that's just scribbled on a wall, and if you call up, ta-da! You now have the mighty Chicken Ned as your homie. What a time to be alive. It's also a way you can use cheats, but what are we, a scrub? You know, there's a lot of things about this game that bring me back, but there's some things that, by today's standards, are just shockingly archaic. For example, the game has no autosave feature of any kind whatsoever. Even after completing a mission, an activity, or whatever it is, it just doesn't save for you. So if you don't want to lose your progress every time you exit the game, you're going to have to manually save every time. Fortunately, there are save points littered across the map, but the best place to save at would be at your crib. After joining the Saints, they give you this awful house to live in over in Saints Row, and here you can save, but also collect some cash from your territories, restock up on weapon ammo, change clothes, etc. Cribs are essentially just places to rest up and restock when necessary. Every time you deal with a rival gang, you will take over their territory and in return get their crib. And man, these are so memorable to me. From the Vice Kings you get the huge King's Penthouse. It's a pretty cool place, and back in the day, I remember some weird bug occurred whereby an NPC actually spawned in here, and I still remember that to this day, but no one ever believed me. Lo and behold, all these years later, what happens? I finally have video evidence that this does sometimes happen, and yeah, I don't know why either.
I ain't ready to die.
Los Canales will provide you with the Lopez Mansion, which is a really laid-back and relaxing place. I wouldn't mind living here, let's just put it that way. But one thing I don't understand, however, is why the fish in the outside pond are seemingly bulletproof. I mean, another question you could ask is why I'm shooting at fish, but anyway, whatever. And the rollers will of course give you Price's Mansion, which, again, is also quite the pad. Not sure about all this weird modern art crap that's littered everywhere within it though, but hey, considering you can find a kickable ball hidden in the chimney, I'll let it slide. Something that surprised me about going back and playing Saints Row 1 is just how many bugs there actually were. Now don't get me wrong, it's not exactly Cyberpunk 2077, but you can occasionally tell that this game, behind the scenes, is held together by bubblegum and string. While playing, I had a bunch of strange occurrences happen. For example, here I am just chasing after this car, and suddenly, the driver just stops and disappears out of existence. So I decide to, naturally, take his car as I intended, only to fly through the air for no reason whatsoever. I mean, why? Another time I'm doing a mission, and in one of the cutscenes a car must have got stuck in one of the walls of the building in the back, leading to this bizarre sparking.
Hey, what's up? Perfect timing.
You boys talk. I'll be right back.
Whatever. She don't appreciate fine dining. Now, I've been talking to Isha's sister. Turns out...
But by far the freakiest bug I encountered was this woman I found, who was just standing on her own looking out to sea, and as soon as I approached her, she just jumped right into the ocean and drowned herself. I mean, I assume this is a bug, either that or a really strange Easter egg. There's also some bugs that go to show the game's age. For example, right at the start of the game I was just doing this mission when all of a sudden I was informed that I was about to abandon my followers, and I'm like, what? Turns out Julius and Troy had their pathfinding stuck trying to follow me and ended up infinitely running into a crate. Fortunately, there aren't a lot of issues like this, but hey, game's ancient, what do you expect? Now I keep talking about the game as if it's exclusively a single player experience, but would you believe me if I said that there was also a multiplayer mode as well? Ah yes, I remember back in the good old days of early Xbox Live, coming on here and kicking some ass.
Switching, PTP and host aren't good because look, one, you can't...
Now considering the game is over a decade old, you probably don't expect it to be all that active, but unbelievably, you'd be wrong. Long-time viewers may remember that a while ago, I was kicked out of the Saints Row Discord server because I called out one of the corrupt moderators for insulting those of us who like Saints Row 1 and 2.
Saints Row 1 is one of the worst games I've ever played.
What we need is for you to shut the fuck up, you feel me?
Almost immediately after this debacle, I was politely confronted and asked if I would like to instead join the Saints Row 1 multiplayer Discord. And I'll be honest with you, I was originally gobsmacked that Saints Row 1 still actually had any form of multiplayer community at all. I mean, the last time I played Saints Row 1 multiplayer, I sounded like a helium balloon. But alas, it's true. The Saints Row 1 multiplayer scene is being kept alive, even after all these years, by a dedicated group of fans who coordinate with each other to get matches going. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get into any match myself, as I outright refuse to pay Microsoft to have the privilege of using my own internet connection. But if you're interested in playing, then make sure you join up. When I joined the server there was less than 100 people in there, but now there are over 300 and rising. Check it out, folks. You know, whenever I go back and play these games from my youth, I get a little nervous. I always remember these games as if they were the greatest, but nostalgia can be hella strong. I sometimes worry about going back and playing them today, just in case I wouldn't be as impressed with them, and thus, in essence, kind of stain my memory of them, if you know what I mean. As life goes on, I find that my standards for entertainment become ever more strict, and for the most part, games just don't really give me that exciting feeling of wonder anymore. I think a lot of you watching this can probably relate. As time passes, I find that games have become less and less fun and more just a dosage of distraction from the real issues that we face. As such, I slowly find myself clutching ever closer into the political realm. Perhaps it's because the modern gaming industry in general is just so corrupt that it's hard to be passionate for it anymore. Or maybe this is just what growing up feels like. But either way, I can say with absolute certainty that my adoration for Saints Row 1 is not just rooted in nostalgia. For the last few days, I have been playing the daylights out of this game, and if you guys know me, you'll know that when I play something, I play it right. After getting 100% completion, my conclusion, I shall repeat yet again, is that it is unbelievable just how underrated this game is. If you are a fan of the GTA series or the later Saints Row games, then you owe it to yourself to go back and play this absolute beauty of a game.